Hey everyone, welcome to another lovely edition of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
Uh, Joe, first, got to talk about the biggest stories right now is NFL free agency, and hidden particularly close to home, the Saints have gotten their quarterback of the future. Uh, they're trying to make it on Twitter. It appears as if it's a really positive story, and I'm sure there's some people somewhere who are excited about it. That does not include me. Derek Carr got signed by the Saints. You know, to me, it's almost like a very similar signing to when they signed Jameis Winston. I mean, I think Derek Carr's had maybe 2 good years with the Raiders in the total time he's been there. Other than that, I feel like he's been a very middle of the road quarterback for most of his tenure. And I felt like with all the moves they made with Sean Payton getting the first round draft pick this year, I think getting another one the year after that, I kind of thought that maybe this was going to be a time they could, finally go and draft a quarterback. But it seems like the front office hesitance of ever drafting a quarterback still exists.
I mean, I have a few thoughts about it. Coming into the offseason, Dan, I feel like I heard that this was a possibility for a long time. And I had mixed emotions at first because I thought to myself, I don't know if Derek Carr is as good as we could get. I feel like we could get somebody better than him, like maybe an Aaron Rodgers, or I even heard some of the speculation even about Tom Brady joining the Saints. And so when I was thinking about those players, he paled in comparison to them. However, the more I've thought about this, I do think this move makes a lot of sense for the Saints because out of what's left in the market, if it's not going to be Aaron Rodgers, I think that Derek Carr gives them the best chance to be a contender the next couple of seasons, because you have to keep in mind their defense right now is totally in win now mode.
Yeah.
They've got so many star defensive players like Demario Davis, Cameron Jordan, even Marshawn Lattimore that have been in the league for 5 or more years, if not a decade, for a couple of those guys. And so I just don't think they could afford to draft a young quarterback or bring in a second-year quarterback and realistically expect to contend. And I think that if Derek Carr can get, in the right system with the weapons that he'll have at his disposal in New Orleans, there's some really good young rookies last season wide receiver. I really think that they may have something here kind of sneaky good.
Okay. Well, I like the optimism. Today I was just thinking to myself, I know they would have had to trade away some to get Lamar Jackson, but how exciting would it have been to have Lamar Jackson and Taysom Hill on the same team where you could just wear defenses out with that ability to run and throw? And I mean, it would be almost like a old school, you could put them both on the field at the same time and it would really it would drive defenses nuts. I think wear them out. And I think that would have been such an exciting possibility for the Saints to have had Lamar Jackson paired with Taysom Hill to spell each other.
No, that would have been a cool dynamic. And I heard a lot about that possibility too. I don't know if maybe the asking price for the Saints was too high. I do like this move for Carr too, because they don't have to give up any draft capital to get him.
Well,
They can
that's
hold on, to that first round pick since they signed him as a free agent. The other thing that I've heard about this deal, Dan, and I would caution anybody, don't overreact to this comparison. But Derek Carr has had some good seasons before. I think it was the 2016 season or 2017. He led the Raiders to like a 12-4 record, and he got injured like the last game of the season. He
I
was
remember that.
arguably the MVP heading into that finale. And so I've heard at least one person say that when you look at this move, again, I don't want anybody, to come out of their seat over this comparison, but this situation with Carr coming from a difficult franchise and joining the Saints with a great defense, with great offense, is not entirely dissimilar from Matthew Stafford joining the Rams 2 years ago. And so it's an opportunity, for Derek Carr to really change the way people view him if he could lead this team to the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely. And you think about early in his career, he was someone that was mentioned oftentimes as a top 10 quarterback in the league, someone who you felt like if you surround him with better talent, he would have had better results. Um, maybe he just needs a new lease. I mean, when the Saints brought in Drew Brees, he had had some good seasons, but hadn't exactly lit the NFL on fire. And so this is like, and Derek Carr's what, like 31? Is that kind of his age?
Yes.
Okay, well, so he's got some time left. I mean, he's probably got 7 or 8 good years left in him. This could be a good move, and the Saints, you're right, are definitely in win now mode in terms of what they have on defense. Um, a lot of woulda, coulda, shouldas, but in my mind, I really wish they could have gotten rid of Michael Thomas when they had the chance to, and now it looks like they're just going to cut him and waste all that money. Um, But now you think about it with what they actually have draft picks wise, maybe they can get some more playmakers to go around them. And I guess that's something you don't have to worry about as much because he's a proven commodity in that his floor is not going to be that bad. In terms of a ceiling, he could have a pretty good one. I don't think it's going to be an excellent one, but there could be a good ceiling. But there's never going to be a bad floor. I don't think.
Yeah, no, and I think that the caveat I'd say about any excitement around Carr, I think is still also relative to the competition in the NFC. With the exception of 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the NFC, there's just not a whole lot out there, especially now, with the story we'll talk about in a minute, with the possibility that Aaron Rodgers may leave the NFC.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Joe. Looking at Aaron Rodgers possibly going to the Jets. A, do you believe the story?
I don't know, for 2 reasons. One, I feel like the last few years there's been this just ongoing narrative that Aaron Rodgers is going elsewhere, and it just never happens. And so I'll kind of believe it when I see it, as they say. And then the second thing somebody told me is that if Rodgers does this and goes to the Jets, then it's going to be another like direct comparison with Brett Favre in his career. And I'm just not sure if Rodgers, wants everybody to always kind of put him in that comparison. And so I've thought about that. And so I don't know what's going to happen at this point.
Yeah, I kind of thought about that too, Joe. I was like, well, that was where Brett Favre went to die, where he went to end his career was with the Jets, and I was like, that'd be kind of weird if Aaron Rodgers would do that. I guess Aaron Rodgers wouldn't have stopped with the Vikings for 3 seasons before he did it. Um, but that would be really weird. I don't really see that, Joe. I mean, in my mind, I always thought he was going to go to San Francisco. And I don't know that that's still on the table or not. It just makes so much sense for me for him to end his career there because I feel like if he goes to the 49ers, they're instantly my Super Bowl favorite.
Yeah, that move to me makes so much more sense. I mean, he could go to the Jets and they'd be a playoff team
Yeah.
and kind of a fringe contender, but there's just too many good AFC teams. Like he's not even the best team in his division with the Bills and others, that he'd have to contend with. And so I think you go to the 49ers, like I don't understand why more, veteran quarterbacks aren't lining up to try to join the 49ers this year.
I mean, with that amazing defense they have right now, and I know obviously they're losing D'Amico Ryans as defensive coordinator, but I mean he's not the only one that's had really successful defenses there lately. They're loaded on talent. Seems like it's just plug and play in terms of DCs there. And in my mind, if I were a quarterback, that would be my number one choice right now.
Mm-hmm. So you're really surprising that that's not getting more traction, but we'll see what happens with Aaron Rodgers. Like, I wouldn't be shocked to see him just stay put in Green Bay.
Yeah, that would be my leaning point right now. If it's between the Jets and the Packers, I don't really think that's even a choice right now. The Jets just have so many problems. I don't see Aaron Rodgers wanting to leave with the consistent success that he's had in Green Bay for a rebuilding job. I think that it has to be something that's like a win now opportunity. It has to be the 49ers saying, hey, come over here. Something like the Seahawks. I could see that. That would be an option too. I mean, what Pete Carroll's been able to do. Geno Smith is obviously just a guy they're going to franchise tag to hold on for one more season. Something like that, I think, would be an option. Or, I think the Saints would have been a great place for Aaron Rodgers if they would have been willing to put out what they needed to get him.
Yeah, I even heard, some talk that the Jets were interested in Derek Carr, and so that kind of presents that Carr Rodgers dynamic. And so, yeah, I mean, it would have been cool if the Saints could have gotten Rodgers. Now he's the most sought after quarterback on the market. And so at the end of the day, though, like I said, I still lean Green Bay because with the exception of Favre, I've never really seen the Jets kind of a destination signing place.
No, absolutely not, especially not for a quarterback. That's like the only time I've ever seen them get somebody of that kind of caliber.
Exactly.
Joe, speaking of high caliber quarterbacks that have kind of been looking at the market, why do you think it is that Lamar Jackson hasn't gotten more traction from a lot of these teams? And, how it seems like he's probably going to stay with the Ravens, but not for what you think he deserves.
Yeah, I think that it has a lot to do with this season. He got injured at the end of the season. I think maybe even last season, 2021, there may have been an injury towards the end of the year. And I think that even though he's 26 years old, the Ravens are a little bit nervous about giving him a long-term contract. I think that with his game, obviously a lot of quarterbacks now, even Mahomes, Josh Allen, Burrow, they move around a lot. They scramble in the pocket. You've got to have, a degree of mobility to exceed at that position right now in the NFL. But I think Lamar Jackson's game even more kind of, predicated on that skill. And so I think that you just have the Ravens a little bit nervous about giving him a huge, lucrative, long-term deal. And I think that that's the reason they did the franchise tag. But I would not be a bit surprised to see a team like, say, the Washington Commanders that are kind of in quarterback purgatory trying to maybe trade for him at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you're a team right now that has been a while since you've had a good quarterback and maybe you got a little bit of draft capital, but you don't have exactly like one of the top first 5 picks, why wouldn't you want to get Lamar Jackson? He also eliminates the need for you to have a great running game. It can kind of, he can hide some issues that you have at wide receiver. Because you think about it, I mean, since he's been at the Ravens, it's basically been Mark Andrews at tight end and Hollywood Brown, and that's kind of it in terms of what he's had the wide receiver. He's been probably in a mid to lower level range of wide receivers the entire time he's been with the Ravens, and he's still been able to have all the success that he's had.
Yeah, he's really kind of made the offense go, and it was unfortunate. A lot of years they had great defenses, but not always the best quarterback play, and so they finally get him, and they just can't seem to get on a long-term plan. And so at the end of the day, if they decide that they do not want him long-term, somebody will, and so it'll be interesting to see if somebody makes that trade. And really, I wouldn't be shocked to see the Ravens showing that they weren't willing to offer him a long-term deal. And to the degree, it's my understanding that the sides are as far apart as maybe $100 million in contract negotiations, which sounds, vastly unprecedented. It kind of seems like they're moving towards being content with moving on from him and getting us some draft picks.
That's what that sounds like to me too. I don't really think that's a gap he can bridge right there.
Yeah, I've never heard of two sides that like apparently 100 million apart.
Well, Joe, on that vein, talking about not being able to meet in the middle, how about Jim Boeheim finally retiring from Syracuse? Seems like modern basketball and the NIL world and all these kind of things just made this inevitable, and he wasn't going to be able to adapt to this. But it's sad. He's kind of like the last of that generation of the old school coaches. We had for the longest time, you had Krzyzewski and Roy Williams and Jim Boeheim and of course, more recently, and he retired now too, you of course had Jay Williams from Villanova. And now they're all gone. And Jim Boeheim was not the one I would have expected to have lasted the longest because, frankly, he was the oldest and he started before the rest of them. But what makes him so incredible is that he literally did it all at Syracuse. I mean, he's almost like he's almost like a Joe Paterno in terms of like starting from the bottom at Syracuse, working his way there, and then never coaching anywhere else.
That's right. I mean, to put it into illustration, I mean, he's been the coach there, I think, for 47 years, longer than Tom Brady's been alive. And you think about it, 2023, it's 20 years to the date of him, anniversary of him winning the national championship at Syracuse with Carmelo Anthony and Keem Warwick and Jerry McNamara over Kansas. And so, he retires with just an illustrious career. several Final Four and other championship game appearances, runner-up. And you're right, he's one of the last ones remaining of this coaching era. I guess one other one that's left, Tom Izzo at Michigan State.
Yeah.
But, the sad thing about Boeheim's retirement for me is it kind of goes quietly. He doesn't go to the NCAA tournament. I heard a little bit, the whisperings the last couple of years that he was nearing the end, but he didn't get the celebration that a lot of coaches get.
Yeah,
and so it ended kind of abruptly for me. So that made it kind of sad.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the incredible career that he had. I mean, he's someone that you felt like should have been celebrated the way that like a Dean Smith was almost in terms of the longevity that he had and the commitment to that one program. I mean, obviously he's not accomplished what Mike Krzyzewski did, and that's why we saw the victory tour that just went on and on last season. But he deserves something, I think, closer to what we got with Roy Williams. I mean, Roy Williams went quietly, but I still felt like he got a lot of accolades for what he did. And you're right. We've heard very little about Jim Boeheim this entire season. And I know he's retiring with not a great team, and it's probably been about 3 or 4 years since Syracuse has been what we're used to them being. But still, I mean, he's someone that I think should have gotten a lot more laud for what he did for such a long time.
Yes, absolutely. And, lastly, I would just add, too, that think about what he did with the famous 2-3 zone defense for Syracuse, that tormented so many opponents on offense in the NCAA tournament so many years. And, he coached so many great players. I think Carmelo Anthony probably being the most popular, won a national title, did it for so long at the same school. And then, just kind of sad that it was in some ways kind of a footnote today. You see them lose just kind of a heartbreaker to Wake Forest in the ACC tournament on a last-second three. And then it's like, oh, Jim Boeheim retired. Here's his successor, who they promoted from within. So it just wasn't, the headline that you would have wanted.
No, I mean, for someone that gave their entire life to a program that even had their son playing on their team the last few years, which I think that's another reason he held on for as long as he did, so that Buddy Boeheim could get to play for him, which, I think a lot of people would be like, that's his son, wouldn't it be his grandson? I think that was part of it also, but I really would have liked to have seen it end better for him, because one thing about Syracuse that I always found interesting is I feel like they kind of, with the exception of 2003 team and maybe 2 or 3 other teams, they were always a team that for most of the season was just kind of okay. And they probably weren't going to make the tournament. Then they get on a little run maybe at the Big East tournament and then later the ACC tournament, and they get in a lot of times in that 7 to even like 12 seed zone. But then they come in and they win 2 or 3 games or get to the Elite Eight. And you could bank on it every time because that zone defense is so hard for teams to prepare for that don't play them all the time. And so when they're not playing a Big East team or an ACC team, whoever's in their conference, they're the toughest out. And so like Syracuse was always one that I could like count on me putting them at least in the Sweet 16, Elite Eight, Final Four, and usually being right when I put it in, because they would always make a lot of advancement in the tournament.
Yeah, no, precisely. And I remember one great example of that, I think, was the 2016 season. They only went like 500 in the ACC. They come in as like a 9 seed or 10 seed, and they end up beating a number 1 seed Virginia in the Elite Eight to make it to the Final Four.
Yeah. And I mean, he was a coach that was consistency. He only finishes with 1 national championship. But I would have to say, out of the coaches that have won 1 national championship, he is leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of them.
I think so. I really can't think of anybody else that would compare.
I mean, the only other person I can think of right now that's only got 1 national championship that at the end of his career you could have an argument with would maybe be John Calipari. But Calipari doesn't have I think a lot of people are going to look favorably on the fact that Boeheim has been with that one school for forever, and that's what he did it at,
Well, I guess Izzo, too. I keep forgetting about him.
I guess he only does have 1 national championship.
Well, that's kind of what happens. When you have 1, it makes it a little bit forgettable sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes you kind of get put in that little spot when you got 1. But I would still put him ahead of Izzo and Calipari at this point.
Yeah, just the long-term sustainability.
Absolutely. Joe, speaking of long-term sustainability, this Auburn basketball team, it was starting to look kind of dire about them making the NCAA tournament. They had a good effort against Alabama that ultimately did not end up in a win. They needed to get the win over Tennessee at home to close out the season. And I was shocked they actually did. And it was, not a commanding win, but it was a solid win. They ended up winning by 9 points, and they closed the game out, which was such a huge thing for me because that had been their biggest problem. They were in all these different games with Alabama, with Tennessee, with Vanderbilt, with Texas A&M, but they couldn't get it done at the end. And this team, I finally saw them make threes at the end of the game. I saw Wendell Green make better decisions with the ball at the end of the game. And I saw them actually make some free throws. And I thought that was a really important win for them, and one that I think secures them a place in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I think it's always big to win that last weekend going into the conference tournament. Even if you don't win the conference tournament, I think you want to be playing with some momentum. You want to have those style points. I can think of some North Carolina teams under Roy Williams where I think all three of his national titles, they lost in like the semifinals or the finals of the ACC tournament where, they played well, but they just, didn't win that extra game at the end. So, finishing the regular season strong, I think is key for Auburn heading into the tournament.
I think so too. And I mean, if you look at Bruce Pearl's teams, the one Final Four team that he's had was one that had a very average season for most of it. Then at the very end, I think they won like maybe their last three conference games, then won the SEC tournament, and then, of course, made their advancement to the Final Four with Jared Harper and Bryce Brown and Chuma Okeke and company. And I've heard some people try to compare this team to that. I'm not going to be one of those people that make this comparison. I'll believe it when I see it. If they win the SEC tournament, then maybe I'll start singing a different tune. But I do think that, there are some comparisons to be made only if they win the SEC tournament. Just the level of shooter is not quite there. But I do think that a lot of times I feel like with Bruce Pearl that it's those kind of teams that end up having better runs in the tournament. I would still look at it right now as Auburn as a team that probably their best bet is making it to the round of 32. But we'll see. At least we'll get to see that opportunity now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a realistic expectation. Maybe like you could have a chance to make it to the Sweet 16 to the second weekend. But as far as the SEC tournament, it just seems like it's going to be tough for anybody to knock off either Texas A&M or Alabama.
Right, and Texas A&M, I mean, talk about playing great basketball right now. They're the ones that get the second loss on Alabama, which was huge right there because Alabama, I mean, they've been having a lot of things that are a lot of closer games since the Brandon Miller stuff came out, but nobody's been able to actually take them down. And Texas A&M, meanwhile, they're the number 2 team in the league. And getting that win, I think, legitimized their place as the second team in the league and shows that they deserve a good seed in the NCAA tournament. I mean, as far as what I've seen right now, they're still listed as like a 7 seed. But I think that if they can go out and they can win some games in the SEC tournament, maybe make it to the final, maybe they could be as high as a 5 or a 4 seed, and they would be very deserving of that.
They certainly should be. I think, what were they, like 15-3 in their conference, I think?
Yeah, I think they only finished one game behind Alabama because Alabama finished at 14-2.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that there was some criticism about their non-conference schedule not being as strong or them not, beating anybody. But yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, a 15-3 conference record and peaking at the right time. I mean, to me, they would be vastly underseeded if they get anything lower than a 5.
Absolutely. If you're a Texas A&M fan and you want to get excited, Joe was talking about Roy Williams' North Carolina teams earlier. I do remember that one of their teams that had their biggest underachievement won the NIT, and then the year after that, they won the national championship. Well, Texas A&M is coming off a year where they probably should have made the NCAA tournament. You and I lobbied hard for them because they really thought they deserved it. But then they ended up winning the NIT last year, and they've gotten hot late at the end of the season. So if they can capture that Roy Williams magic, it could be a national championship for Aggieland.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Buzz Williams has come a long way as coach. He started out as an assistant, I think, under Tom Crean at Marquette. And at first, there was a lot of talk about him just kind of winning with teams that he inherited from Tom Crean when he left to go to Indiana. And it's been really cool to see the progression of Buzz Williams, like building his own program, doing it at Virginia Tech and then now doing it from the ground up at A&M.
Yeah, he's a very good coach. And I mean, it seems like it always works out for him. And he seems like he kind of has a little bit of an underdog mentality with his teams. And it seems like it's definitely worked for him. Joe, speaking of underdog mentality, We were talking about it last week with Chris Beard being looked at by Ole Miss. Well, he's now officially interviewed for him, and it seems like, according to everyone out there, the pundits, he's the number one choice right now.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way, Dan. Some of the traction subsided a few days ago where I started hearing reports of some Ole Miss beat writers just reading and listening to stuff that apparently the market had opened up a little bit more for Beard, where maybe even like some of the Big 12 teams, rivals of Texas, were interested in him. Like there was speculation, for instance, that Kansas State's coach might be interested in the Texas job and that Chris Beard might go to Kansas State. So that was kind of interesting. So I was a little bit, not sure if he was going to Ole Miss, but now it looks like it's heated up again. And more than likely, Chris Beard is going to be the next coach at Ole Miss. And, regardless of what anybody thinks about it, there is no denying that Ole Miss will suddenly be, one of the most talked about college basketball programs in the country.
Absolutely. I mean, I look at it as their chance to do what Auburn did when they hired Bruce Pearl. Obviously, very different, past transgressions and issues, but this is the time when you can get a coach like this. That was the time that Auburn could have gotten Bruce Pearl, and now it's worked out the way it has, and it's golden. And this is the one chance that Ole Miss could have to get a coach like Chris Beard, and it seems like they're taking advantage of it right now. I'm going to feel good when I see that it's signed, sealed, delivered.
Yeah, I could see them announcing it like Monday or Tuesday of next week because they know they're going to take some criticism from the media, but it will subside when the tournament starts. So I could look for it Monday or Tuesday.
It's a good idea too to not announce that before your players are playing in the SEC tournament too. I mean, you need to give the interim coach a chance to see what he can do, even if it's mere lip service. And you also don't want to announce it, get all the negative heat, and affect the play of them against South Carolina. You don't want that to be out there.
Exactly. It's going to be somewhat of a difficult marketing technique how they present the story, but from a basketball standpoint, I think that there's going to be a lot of interest now.
No, it's a slam dunk. I mean, you look at what he did. Texas Tech is a program that, outside of having Bobby Knight and having a little bit of success under him, there wasn't a whole lot they could hang their hat on. And then boom, he gets there. I think he takes them to the Elite Eight. He gets the national championship game. Gets pretty close to being Virginia. I mean, I think it was a pretty competitive game for most of it. And then instantly when he gets hired at Texas, I mean, he has a team this year that would have been a Final Four team, I think, if he could have coached the entire season. And even without him being there, I mean, they're still a team that may make the Final Four, and they've been able to maintain that nucleus because of how good they were.
Yes. I mean, it's going to be interesting with, the transfer portal. It's going to be interesting to see the team that he has in year one.
Absolutely. All right, Joe, speaking of, we got a lot of great coaches in the SEC right now. How many teams do you actually think make the tournament this year out of the SEC?
Let's see, let me count them out. So obviously Alabama, A&M, Tennessee, I think Auburn. I think that Arkansas, that's 5. Then I think of a few that are kind of like fringe, like I think Vanderbilt and State, there's a chance. It seems like maybe more likely for State than Vanderbilt, but maybe both. So what's that, 7? I could see 7 or 8. Missouri.
Yeah, I think Missouri's in. I think that's
in Kentucky. So maybe 8 or 9.
Yeah, I think as many as 9. I ultimately feel like one of Mississippi State or Vanderbilt's not going to make it. I've seen State listed as one of the last 4 in. Vanderbilt seems to still be in that next 4 out. But to be honest, out of like the bottom 3 teams that should make it, with that being, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, and Arkansas, I think that Vanderbilt's got a better argument than Mississippi State or Arkansas. And Vanderbilt's sitting there at 11-7 in the league. They're an exciting team. I mean, they beat Auburn on a last-second layup. They beat Tennessee on the last-second three-pointer. They beat Kentucky on a last-second three-pointer. Coached by college basketball great and NBA great Jerry Stackhouse. And I just think it'd be a great story to see Vanderbilt in this tournament.
No, it really would. And you had Stackhouse win co-SEC Coach of the Year awards. I think announced yesterday or Monday. And I think it would be a travesty to see them left out. I think, too many people are holding the LSU loss against them from a few weeks ago, but they've played really well since then. I think their entire resume kind of speaks for itself. And I think that we were talking about before the show, if they were in a different conference, I don't think not only would they be in the tournament, I think they'd be talking about how high would they be seated.
Yeah, I mean, I think you put them in the Big 10 or the Big 12, they're probably a 5 or a 6 seed.
Mm-hmm. And people are talking about him as like a dark horse Final Four contender.
Absolutely. They're talking about them, like, oh, look, this is like another example of how like the Juwan Howard thing can work. Like, look how this former great basketball player is doing it in his first opportunity as a head coach. I think that would be the storyline. Instead, it looks like right now that Vanderbilt has to win 1, possibly 2 games in the SEC tournament to make the NCAA tournament. And I just don't think that's right.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. You mentioned Arkansas. I think one reason Arkansas is like getting a lot of credit is because they were ranked so high in the preseason. So I think people just kind of want to put them in the tournament.
Yeah, I think that they get a lot of credit because they were ranked so high in the preseason. I think early beginning of the year, I think they were the favorite to win the SEC. And the last 2 years, Musselman has been able to make the Elite Eight. And so they know they can do it in March. I've seen nothing from this Arkansas team to tell me that they can make the Elite Eight, but we'll see. I mean, he has had some teams that weren't great for a lot of the season that were able to make runs at the end. So I think that's why they're getting the credit they are.
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, if we don't see an A&M or an Alabama make the deepest run, I would say pay attention obviously to Kentucky if they figured it out with Schwebe, and then also Missouri. To me, looks like they could be a pick.
Absolutely, and Tennessee is a team that, from a matchup standpoint, is always one that's gonna have a lot of chances to win because of how great their defense is. The question is that offense going to be hanging in? Vescovy is a guy that can take a game over. I would still think Tennessee is a team that I look at to least make the Sweet 16, and if they can get their shooting together, could be a dark horse also.
Yeah, the hardest thing for them, I think, was that injury bug they had. I think their starting point guard is out, so that's the toughest thing for them. But their defense has been phenomenal.
That's right. And speaking of defense, that's what we're going to see a lot of in the SEC tournament. We'll be back next week to talk about the winners of the SEC tournament, give an analysis of it, and also give our preview of the NCAA tournament. Thank you for listening. Catch all of our episodes on Spotify. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.